In a recent conversation with Alan Watts, he told me that he didn't see how I could fit all of what Piana and Skinner did in the 80s into a single episode. I was confident I could do it. I was wrong. This is part 1. Season 2 is generously supported by RAB, one of climbing's most historic brands. Founded in 1981 by climbers, for climbers, RAB are on a journey to reduce the impact of their business, expand access to the outdoors, and preserve our mountain playgrounds for future generations. RAB. The mountains are our meeting place. On June 16, 1988, Craig Herzog and friends were climbing Moby Dick, a 5'10" fingers-to-fist crack at the base of El Cap, not far from the start of the Salathé Wall. Less than a week earlier, competition climbing had debuted in America at Snowbird, Utah, and the talk around the valley was undoubtedly not about Patrick Edlanger's incredible finals performance, but about the fact that Ron Kalk, Stonemaster and Valley legend, had defected. Not only was he clipping bolts, but he was competing on artificial walls. What was next? Lycra? While the debate raged on about the value and validity of the direction that climbing seemed to be going, Herzog caught something out of the corner of his eye. Something falling. Rock! But it wasn't rock that he saw. 2 black haul bags tied together with a length of turquoise rope came crashing through the trees and cratered about 30 meters from the wall. Rock and debris came raining down with them. Looking back up, he saw something else falling that landed on a ledge. It looked like a body. It was early in the afternoon on a Thursday, so knowing that not many people were around, but rangers would be in the office, Herzog hurried to a phone. Within the hour, rangers were on the scene. The haul bags had exploded when they hit the ground. Rangers surmised that this hadn't been the usual haul bags thrown off the top to avoid carrying them down scenario. The contents weren't something someone would have just thrown off. Not to mention the obviously cut ropes. Scanning the face of El Cap through binoculars, Park Ranger John Jackson spotted a purple jacket on a ledge. Luckily, not a body. Climbers on the nose were contacted and determined to be fine. But what about Todd Skinner and Paul Piana? Everyone knew they were up on the Salathé trying to free the impossible pitches. Where the hell were they? 2 hours and 15 minutes after the bags hit the ground, the search was called off. Still, no sign of Skinner and Piana. I'm Chris Hampton. You're listening to Written in Stone, climbing's most important ascents. This is Season 2, the 1980s.
1, 2.
Paul Piana grew up in Newcastle, Wyoming, on the western edge of the Black Hills. Enamored with exploration from as early as he could remember, a Life magazine article about climbing in Boulder, Colorado, caught his attention. Soon after, on a family trip to Denver, he convinced his parents to take him to a mountaineering store. Wandering around, unsure whether to ask questions or just pretend he knew what the various equipment was for, Paul picked up a book, Rock Climbers in Action in Snowdonia, and opened it. What he saw stunned him. 2 soaring vertical walls met at a perfect 90-degree corner. A tiny man in knickers, a flat cap, and a harlequin-patterned shirt bridged across the corner, left hand and foot high, while a thin pencil line of a rope stretched below him. Rusty Bailey on Cenotaph Corner, shot by John Clear. From that moment, Paul was hooked. He wanted nothing more than to be a rock climber. A friend had taken some classes at a summer camp and had a few carabiners and a rope. What to do with them, they made up as they went. It would be several years before he met anyone who was, by his estimation, a real climber. He didn't know the rules of climbing, or even that there were rules at all. Paul and his junior high school friends would just go out, get inspired to try something, and then try to make it to the top by any means possible. Whenever they could convince their parents to drive them to the Needles, they'd often finish the day by scrambling up onto a big flake that afforded them a good view of one specific spire that they dreamed about, the Tricuni Nail, and one specific route, Cerberus. Cerberus was rated 5'8", but to them, it looked impossible. They'd only climbed 5'3". If it hadn't been for the pitons and high bolts, they'd have believed the route a myth, complete with a superhero first ascensionist given the unlikely name Royal Robbins. Local legends Herb and Jan Kahn assured the boys that it could indeed be climbed, that Royal Robbins was indeed a real person, and that a Newcastle climber, Wren Fenton, had also climbed it. Paul went in search of this Wren Fenton and bugged him until Wren agreed to take Paul climbing. Wren taught Paul the ropes, literally. He showed him better knots and better belay techniques and how to lead, or more importantly, convinced him that he should try leading even if he thought he couldn't do it. But perhaps most important is that Wren taught Paul that there was a better style than pounding in a piton and grabbing it to pull up on. The equipment should be there just in case you fall. Otherwise, the climbing has to be between you and the rock. Paul understood immediately. It wasn't about a rule. It was about a philosophy. It was about fair play and doing the very best that you could. In 1970, a year into the mentorship, Wren suggested that Paul was ready for Cerberus. Riding Wren's confidence, Paul floated it. It was a revelation for the 16-year-old. He could do this. And if Royal Robbins could be first, well, why couldn't he? Surely there were pinnacles in the Needles that hadn't yet been climbed. For the next several years, he'd author first ascents across the Black Hills with legendary climbers of the time like Bob Camps, Paul Mule, and Pete Delanoy. After high school graduation, Paul enrolled at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, only a few miles down the road from the granite playground of Vidavoo. During that first school year, he learned the ways of the wide cracks and the flesh-eating crystals, repeating routes and doing a handful of first ascents. Early in his sophomore year, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. Meanwhile, 4.5 hours to the west in Pinedale, Wyoming, Todd Skinner wasn't even thinking about rock climbing. Bigger peaks, of course, climbing and skiing. Mostly skiing, actually, but that meant that he was comfortable in the mountains. His family operated wilderness camps in the Wind Rivers just out their back door. Coincidentally, just over on the other side of the winds, less than 100 miles away as the crow flies, were miles of white dolomite walls with bulging roofs and devious pockets. But Wild Iris hadn't been discovered as a climbing area yet. That would have to wait more than a decade for Holly Skinner, Todd's sister, to find it. But that's a whole different story. When Todd graduated from high school, he, like Paul and many other Wyoming residents, also decided to go to the University of Wyoming in Laramie. Out of the Marine Corps and back at school in the spring of 1979, Paul Piana was determined not to waste time. In fact, he'd been dreaming of a particular climb the whole time he'd been in the Marines, a very faint arête that separated two walls, the kind of arête you'd only notice when the light is just right. It was still undone. He and Kelly Thorpe went out and put a few bolts in and worked on figuring out the bouldery sequence. After a few days of sorting out moves, Paul finished the route and named it Spider God. Just then, a group of underclassmen came walking by, and one of them he recognized as the gangly kid he'd seen while traversing the stone walls of the student cafeteria on campus. In fact, he couldn't help but remember him. He wore an old Willens harness with figure eights and chocks from the 50s clanking with every step. And those boots, grossly oversized Royal Robbins Yosemite boots, royal blue with bright red laces, of course. The kid spoke up. He wanted to try. Try being the key word. According to Paul, he fell 1,000,000 times but had the time of his life and was eager to come back to try to do it without falling. The kid's energy was infectious. Paul saw a belay slave. Later, at the cafeteria wall, the kid asked for Paul's advice. "First things first, man, you need some new shoes." Todd Skinner bought his first EBs. Still too big, but much, much better. Many years later, being interviewed by Paul for Rock and Ice magazine, Todd would say, "Probably the most significant event was when you invited me along for the first ascent of Spider God, and if I hadn't been invited along for that, and if I hadn't fallen many, many times and made at least some of the moves, I probably would have fallen far short of where I am now." But Skinner was as smart as he was eager. Recognizing that he had a great opportunity to learn rock climbing from someone who really knew their stuff, he paid close attention. Lap after lap on the cafeteria wall, climb every route in the area, pull-ups on the door jams at night, try as hard as possible every day. And when they couldn't climb anymore, they'd sit in Skinner's dorm room, flipping through books and magazines and dreaming about the grand rock climbs that they could do. They discovered in each other an extreme bent to push the limits, to explore, to be the first. But most of all, they both just loved doing it. For their first route together, they established Orange Christmas, a bolted but run-out vertical and slabby face climb. At 5'11", it was near the top of the current scale in Wyoming. Nobody had established 5'12" yet. But one crack, centrally located on one of the most obvious formations in Vitavu, the Coke bottle, had thus far repelled all suitors and was rumored to be 5'12". In May of 1980, the new partners started working on the route. Beginning up a slippery, left-leaning chimney, the route required the finesse and trickery that Piana had learned through years of free climbing. Skinner hadn't quite the same experience. Yet. Though it wouldn't be long before the gangly kid with the goofy grin had mostly closed the gap in ability. After several days of work, Piana made it through the wide stuff to the finger and hand crack, cruised that to the next wide section, and belayed where the original 8 ascent had, before finishing the very short pitch to the top. They called it 4th of July crack, the first 5'12" in Wyoming, but they also suspected it could be done as one long pitch. But that would have to wait. Now that they were entering into new levels, they needed a point of reference. So together, they took a road trip to a place they couldn't get enough of reading about, Yosemite Valley. In his book, Beyond the Summit, Todd writes, "It was like going into a cathedral, shoes off and head down." The reverence was warranted. At the time, Yosemite was the center of the climbing universe, and had been for years. Many of the advances in difficulty, gear, and attitude had been birthed there. And Todd and Paul had a list, a dream list, routes they would check out to see what 5'12" really felt like. Taking a big step out of his comfort zone, Todd started up Ron Kauk's route Tales of Power, rated 12B. And then, he just didn't fall. After that route, they climbed Separate Reality, Hangdog Flyer, and several other 5'12s. By the end of the trip, they knew that what they'd been doing in Vitavu was hard, and that they could climb much harder. What they didn't know is that gears were turning that would push Yosemite out of the center of the climbing universe. Gears that the two of them would, ultimately, have a part in turning. Back in Vitavu, Skinner's confidence was soaring. He returned to the 4th of July crack and made the first complete ascent, skipping the aid belay and going straight up the obvious crack. The student had equaled the teacher, and in some ways, passed him by. Over the next couple of school years, while local wide crack master Bob Scarpelli picked off the area offwits, Todd and Paul traded first ascents on the area's flaring thin cracks and seemingly blank faces, establishing hard classic after hard classic. 11 Cent Moon, Mr. Chimp, Arch Stanton, Harder Than Your Husband, Master of Sport, Pretty Girls with Long Knives, New Mutant. They'd make the 5-hour drive, 4 if Todd was driving, to Devil's Tower and make first free ascents of the thin stemming cracks there. On the lead of a route called Hollow Men 12C, Todd placed 14 number 1 RPs in a row. Wyoming climbing had gone from 11 plus to 12 plus in just a couple of years. And while not quite at the world standard in terms of difficulty, these two Wyoming cowboys had built a very specific skill set, one that prepared them for climbs they couldn't even yet imagine. We'll be right back. This episode of Written in Stone is brought to you by Rab. For more than 40 years, Rab have been crafting rugged, high-performance clothing and equipment that give you absolute protection, comfort, and freedom in the mountains. With roots in the climbing community of Sheffield, UK, they're dedicated climbers themselves, and they channel this expertise and passion into their designs. Nothing fancy or over-engineered, just honest, hard-working gear you'd rather repair than replace. Rab are on a journey to reduce the impact of their business, make it fairer for everyone, and expand access to the outdoors. Whether it's phasing out fluorocarbons or giving used gear a second life through their service center, they're committed to preserving our mountain playground for future generations. On their first trip to Waco Tanks, Texas in 1982, Todd and Paul had stared up at an old aid line through a steep, fat flake with a thin crack on the north face of the Eagle. In May of 1984, Todd returned. He writes in his journal, May 9th. It's really hot down here. Shade routes only. Today I was back on what will be known as the gunfighter. So damn hard. I got the rope up quite a ways today, but at one point, reached behind me to grab a friend and ended up with my chalk bag in my teeth and no more strength left in either hand. May 13th. I failed again yesterday, and today would have been an appropriate day to have outdrawn the gunfighter, but I got shot down again. Today I got a special package in the mail. We were just sitting around discussing the need for a super fast method of chalking up when up drives the ranger with a large envelope. Piana has sent an around-the-neck slap-activated chalk banger. Invented especially for this climb, it works really well, and I'm sure we'll be able to apply the theory on other desperados. I almost gave up today because I couldn't find a logical way to do the last grim moves, nor a good way to get to them. I tried everything from lunges to double heel hooks to hand against foot stacks. Finally, at wit's end, I connected wild lunges and opposition holds and made the moves. So hard. May 14th. I took a day off and did some soloing in a new, beautiful 2-pitch face route on the main face that went at 510 plus X. May 15th. 10th day on the gunfighter, and I almost got it. Power failure just inches from the end. It was heartbreaking, but now I know I'll get it soon. I found an over-the-head knee lock that connects crux sections. The route is so unendingly technical and terminally sustained. Near end of page, leaving room for good news. May 17th. Bad news. I came really close today, but could not stick on the last dyno move, all out with the right hand for a rounded bump that's so hard to get and harder to stay on. I went up today from the ground. Until now, I've left the ropes up, but don't want any questions regarding validity when this is finished. May 18th. Waiting for a partner on a hot morning. I hope it goes today. 4 strong attempts, but no gold. I'm being belayed by son of judge. 3-hour nap between first and last pair of attempts. Lonely bivvy and psych out/up. May 19th. A long fall trying to clip in with slack in my hand. I hurt my right hand. I stayed out and psyched all day in the desert. When I came in, I found a girl to belay me. No mistakes. The gunfighter. 513. Adios, amigo. Gunfighter was the first 513 Todd had established, and it only whet his appetite for more. A year later, in the spring of 1985, he was in Yosemite. While cragging at the Cookie Cliff, he took a long look at a pin-scarred aid crack called the Stigma. Having honed his ability to stand on next to nothing in Waco and Vitavu, and recognizing that the pin scars could be ferocious but usable finger locks, or at least side pull crimps, he figured that he might as well put a rope on it and try it. After a few days of top roping, he knew it would go. He'd done the moves. Linking them together would be a whole different beast, and he suspected it might be the hardest thing in the valley. There was still one big problem. He wasn't sure he could stop to place gear. But I mean, it is a practice aid crack. People are hammering pins in and out of it all the time. Why not just fix a few pins and go for it? He scavenged in Camp 4 for any lost arrow pitons that he could find, then hammered them in, taking care not to plug up any of the best locks. For 2 single-minded weeks, he obsessed over the route. He spent session after session hanging all over it, working out moves and clipping stances, an ethic at the time, and especially in Yosemite, still very much frowned upon. But as of yet, nobody had paid him much attention, maybe because there was big news happening on the walls around him. Jerry Moffett, quite possibly the best climber in the world, had just arrived. The locals perked up. Skinner barely noticed. Peter Croft showed up in the valley and free-soloed the north face of the rostrum. The locals perked up. Skinner barely noticed. Kim Kerrigan arrived from Australia and did the first complete ascent of the rostrum, including the alien finish, on site. The locals perked up. Skinner barely noticed. In an interview with Jeff Smoot, Kerrigan said, "Todd Skinner trying to free the stigma, that's pretty controversial. For someone relatively unknown to come into the garden of the valley demigods and give something they all think is impossible a go, I'd say that's very controversial, as will be the style in which he'll eventually do it. It's over his limit, sure. He's hangdogging up it, so what? He fixed some pins in it, big deal. The thing is, he's pushing himself. He's trying, and when he succeeds, he'll be a better climber and will leave something for the next person to aspire to do in better style." Kim Kerrigan was a great climber, but he also might have been a prophet. A few days later, Todd finished the project, stopping at a no-hands ledge about 20 feet before the crack thinned down into nothing. He left a note at the base proclaiming it to be 513 plus and that he'd renamed it the Renegade. Probably not a good start if he was looking for goodwill. He also asked that the pins be left in so that it could be tried as a free climb. The locals perked up. The valley demigods? They were not happy. Man, that was nothing more than a glorified aid climb.
He could only do a hangdog. That's cheating.
He didn't even go to the end of the crack anyway.
Who in the hell does he think he is?
Somehow, the purposeful repeated hammering in and removal of pins that Bridwell had done a decade earlier with the intention of creating finger locks was seen as a forward-thinking thing, but fixing pins in a practice aid crack and using the existing pin scars to climb the hardest route in the area, well, that was unethical? The hypocrisy was deep and thick, and it was holding back progress. Interestingly, Alan Watts would later make the second ascent, ground up, placing gear rather than using fixed pins, and go to the end of the crack. The response would be nearly the same. The naysayers weren't even sure what it was they were angry about. Maybe just the fact that climbing had moved on without them. It's no coincidence that a few months after Watts repeated the route, Todd said, "On my recent travels, I was very impressed with Alan Watts, who is, without reservation, the best climber right now in America." Years later, the Renegade would sprout bolts and an anchor at the no-hands stance. Make of that what you will, but also consider this. In photos of Skinner working on the route, he looks unsure. There's a distinct innocence present. None of his trademark confidence. And I can't help but wonder how much of his later convictions sprang from this moment. He'd walked into the cathedral, shoes off and head down, and applied the tenacity and vision he'd cultivated by reading stories about the same people who had decried and invalidated his efforts. We can't ask him now, but I'd be willing to bet that at some point while he was driving out of Yosemite and pointing his VW bus back toward Wyoming, the thought crept into his head. Just wait. I'll show them. Hey everyone, we are nearly to the end of Season 2 of Written in Stone, and I have a few exciting updates. Number 1, pre-orders for our first book covering the 1990s will be up soon, and the first 50 or so people to pre-order will get to choose a signed photo of Gilbert Tribou or of Lynn Hill on some of their seminal routes from the 1990s. But the Secret Stoners Club, our Patreon, will be the first people to know about pre-orders, so you'd better get in there and join. It's free. Also, we've started a YouTube channel where I'll be adding some context to vintage videos and discussing some of the interesting points of climbing history. And I'd love it if you'd subscribe. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year so that we can make a little money over there and keep this thing rolling. And finally, we have a limited number of signed copies of Paul Piana's book, Big Walls, right now. All of those links are in your show notes. As always, thank you for listening. While working on what would become the Renegade, Todd heard from Jeff Smoot about a potentially free climbable aid crack in Index, Washington called City Park. It was pin-scarred just like the Renegade, and though both Alan Watts and Skinner understood that the future of American climbing was in the bolt-protected faces, they couldn't resist the allure, the immediate future, of those painful pin scars. And Todd had made Smoot swear he wouldn't tell Watts about City Park until he could try it, and soon after the debacle in Yosemite, he secretly visited the crack and recognized its potential. He swore Smoot to more silence. After all, Watts had climbed the east face of Monkey Face, the hardest route in the country, and then the Renegade immediately after, so Todd knew Watts would do the thing if he made it there first. So in May of 1986, when Smoot bumped into Skinner at Smith Rock and jokingly told him that Watts had heard about the crack and was considering a trip to Index, Todd jumped into his van and drove north immediately, without checking the weather. It rained for 2 days straight in Index, and City Park was dripping wet. On his way out of town, Todd stopped at the Index General Store and on a whim paid a local kid to check on the condition of the crack. The kid would then post a note on the bulletin board at the store saying wet or dry. Todd would call the store and ask them to read the note. By the end of May, the note read dry, and he was once again driving north from Smith, followed by Russ Clune, Bob Yoho, and Hugh Hare. A few Index locals took notice of how the crew was working on the route, hanging all over it and repeatedly trying sequences. The wall was marked up with tick marks for fingers, feet, and gear placements, not par for the course and not looked at kindly. The assault wore on, and Clune and crew headed back to Smith. Todd stayed put, obsessed by the possibility. On his last try before having to depart to California for a series of slideshows, he fell from the final hard move. He left, knowing it could be done, but returned to days of rain. When things had dried out, Todd hiked to the lower town wall and began his pre-climb rituals. Free solo Godzilla nearby 5'9" crack while trailing ropes, set up a rappel rope on City Park and lower down slowly, cleaning and remarking jams and footholds. As he tried to brush away something dark in a pin scar, he realized what he was looking at. Grease. Somebody had wrapped down and smeared grease in the finger locks. Todd was furious. This was too much. If the point of the old school ethics was fair play between the rock and the climber, then where the hell did this fit? Somebody's ego had decided that their own self-worth depended on how and how hard other people climbed, and the only way they could feel good about themselves was to slow down the better climbers. Jeff Smoot writes in his book Hangdog Days, "But Todd, like any right-minded zealot, was not about to let sanity cloud his judgment. He went back to his van, grabbed a butane torch, and headed right back up there to burn the grease out of the pin scars." Over the course of 4 attempts that day, he got closer and closer, and then finally, as darkness had all but completely fallen, he was through the final hard moves. Then, in the dark, he stuck his fingers into a key finger lock in the 511 finish that he'd missed with the torch. It was still filled with grease. Couldn't find a way around, and was starting to panic when Jeff Smoot yelled up that if he stepped right and made a 510 mantle, he could finish on a 5.9 to the top. With no more gear and no more light, Todd did exactly that. Glad to have gotten it done before the vandals could return, Todd joked that he would call the route Grease Monkey. He gave it 13C, only a notch harder than what Watts had suggested for the Renegade. The next day was a busy Saturday, and there was Todd, hanging on the route in his sponsored gear, posing for photos. Not a chance he actually did it.
Hangdogging is cheating.
He never even went to the top. He bailed to the easier route.
Who in the hell does he think he is?
But one thing is for sure. In those photos of Todd on City Park, there's more confidence, more conviction. Early in 1987, Todd was back in Waco Tanks, living at Pete's Quonset hut on the road into the park. On the same formation as the gunfighter, he'd been shown a line of big Wacos out a steep wall. It would require bolts, which were illegal. Or were they? According to legend, the bolts themselves were legal, and it was legal to climb the bolted routes. But it was illegal to install the bolts. So if somehow bolts just appeared on the rock, it was totally okay to climb on them. To add to the confusion, bolts had been placed in the park since the mid-70s without much consequence. Not to mention, by this time, Skinner's willingness to heed anyone attempting to block his or climbing's progress had been cauterized. He listened, sure, but then he found a way around it. Under cover of darkness, using a muffled drill and a system of lookouts and flashing lights, he drilled bolts up and across the line of Wacos, placing them further and further apart as he got higher above the desert floor. The route, Legends Never Die, came in at 13A and became an instant classic. Belgian superstar Arnaud de Kent, who repeated the route shortly after, said it was the best route that he'd climbed in America. But does it being a classic route make bending the rules okay? Ranger dodging and secret bolting attempts lasted nearly a decade until 1998, when climbing restrictions would strangle the Waco climbing scene. Many blamed Skinner for the new rules, and their blame is understandable. It might even be absolutely correct, but we also have to consider that the restrictions may very well have saved Waco Tanks from being loved to death. Legendary boulderer Jason Cale, who left the park in disgust when the restrictions were put into place, would later return and change his mind. In his words, "I think the restrictions are bad for climbing, but good for Waco Tanks. This is a special place besides the climbing, and we must protect it." And I'm not saying that Todd Skinner saved Waco Tanks, but those who place the weight of the restrictions solely on his shoulders, well, they might be saying exactly that. After Legends, Todd and British strongman Craig Smith headed to Mount Lemmon, Arizona, where they were very quickly stuck into the local bolting wars. Even though they hadn't placed a single bolt, their mere presence sparked flames. So they got back on the road, headed toward California, where they had a 3-point tick list. First, they made a brief pit stop at Sugarloaf near Lake Tahoe, where they both ticked Tony Yaniro's Grand Illusion. Box 1, checked. And Yosemite, John Backer had recently completed a new crack climb called the Phantom. Craig made the second ascent, and Todd quickly ticked the third. The locals hid in the bushes and watched, no doubt reporting the details back to the Valley demigods. Box 2, checked. In Box 3, well, that is for next time.
1, 2.
Written in Stone is produced by me, Chris Hampton, with help from Riley Rush for Plugtone Audio, a group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. Right now, we have got signed copies of Paul Piana's book, Big Walls, on our website. The link is right there in your show notes. And remember, this show is 100% rooted in the facts, but like Todd Skinner always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. If you love what you're hearing, give us those 5 stars and a glowing review, join our Patreon, the Secret Stoners Club, and tell everyone you know, at the crag, at the gym, and those trad dads with the can of axle grease headed to the top of the cliff, stop them and tell them, and together we can tell the stories of climbing's most important ascents, one decade at a time. Secret Stoners. I am out of breath. Was just having a kissing war with my toddler. I'm pretty sure that I won. Maybe she won. Either way, we both won. But I'm out of breath. I guess that tells you the kind of shape I'm in. I'm not in toddler kissing war shape. That's for sure. First things first, shout out to Rich F. I appreciate you, Rich, our newest rock star. Speaking of rock stars and legends, our paying Secret Stoners, very soon we will be releasing pre-orders for the Season 1 book covering the 1990s, and the first 50, 60, something like that orders will be getting a signed photo of either Lynn Hill or Gilbert Tribou, your choice. And the reason that connects to our rock stars and our legends is because those are the folks who will know about the pre-orders first. Then the rest of the Secret Stoners Club will know about the pre-orders, and then it will go public. So you all will have a chance to get those signed photos before everyone else. Also, shout out to Russ Clune, who just stopped by my house today. We went climbing a couple of days ago. He is working on trying to send 66 or 67, one of those two numbers, 512s, for his 66th or 67th year. Better hurry up, Russ. It's going to be 68 before you know it. And he came out, and I set him up on a couple of the best 12s in Lander, gave him some beta. He flashed them both. Really cool to see Russ climbing at that level. It's fun to watch someone who's got so much experience climbing, who doesn't second guess themselves very often, who just motors through, who doesn't really hesitate. If there's a fall, there's a fall, but otherwise they just go for it. Really cool to see, really inspiring to see. So thanks, Russ. Thanks, Amy, for stopping in and for going out climbing with me and coming over and saying hello to the family. So thank you. And actually, it was because I was out climbing with Russ that 9/10 of this episode is in one voice and the other 10th is in another voice, because I was yelling beta and psych over the wind and talking a lot. And when I recorded this episode, my voice was damn near shot. And then as I made some small changes, my voice was better. So if you can hear the difference in a few spots, that's why. I almost today it's Sunday, re-recorded the entire thing just so it was all in one voice. But I know that a lot of people are just listening on their phone. They're probably not going to be able to tell the difference. I can tell the difference, and it sort of bugs me a little bit, but I'm not going to allow that to affect it because this episode was already a battle. Alan Watts was absolutely right. There was no way I was getting all this into one episode unless it was going to be an hour and a half long episode. And that was daunting to get done in a week. So wasn't going to happen. But that means episode 2 gets to really focus in on the Salathé itself. Because there was just so much that built up to the Salathé throughout the 80s. These two had one of the greatest partnerships, and I really want to delve into that partnership more in the Salathé episode, because I do think that the partnership was an important part of such a visionary ascent. So we'll be getting into that next episode. And speaking of Alan Watts, Alan sent me a video. You remember last season, Alan had sent me a short clip of a TV show that aired that had Wolfgang, Ron Kalk, and Alan all climbing in Smith, doing the first ascent of the Backbone. I pestered Alan until he found the entire TV show, and it's amazing. And I'm going to put it on the YouTube soon. Once I'm done with this season, I'm going to put it together because some recent history just happened. A route that Alan bolted in preparation for that TV show that turned out to be pretty hard. So they did something easier for the show. That route just got sent recently. So I'm going to combine some video of that send with this old video and some of what Alan's told me about it and put a video out on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed over there yet, please go and do that. We're so close to getting that channel monetized, and the faster that happens, the faster I can put some interesting videos together and maybe react to some old videos while calling up people who were involved with the video to see what they have to say about it. And I think that's going to be really fun. Anyway, I'm chatty Cathy right now for some reason, probably because I just won my kissing war with my toddler and I'm on a high. I'm on top of the world here. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for the support that you've been giving. I'm really excited to be almost done with this season, but it's also a little bit bittersweet. So next week, part 2, Todd Skinner, Piana, the free Salathé. I'll see you then.